Okay, so for this next section, very excited to be able to introduce one of Google's engineers. So we have Joel Solomons, who's based in Australia. Funnily enough, I didn't realize, but Dan has known Joel for years. I've just known Joel recently through APAC. So I'll let Joel introduce himself. Hi, Joel, are you here?
Hey everyone. Yeah, great to be here. Yeah, no, for a long time. Actually through my wife. So my wife used to run the Google Innovators program globally, and I think that she worked with Dan quite a long time ago with that. She doesn't work at Google anymore, but I'm still here. They haven't gotten rid of me yet, which is good news. But yeah, I'm going to take you through a few different areas. I do have a big picture of me. Yeah, this is the one. So yeah, I've been at Google about 14 years, based out of Sydney, Australia, but I spent 4 years in Mountain View in California with the education team. I was actually the first customer engineer on the education team globally, which was pretty cool. And then I spent 3 years in London looking after EMEA and being the only customer engineer in EMEA before getting a bit tired of the cold weather in London, being an Australian, and decided to come back home to Sydney. So yeah, been based out of Sydney basically for a while now, all pre-COVID time. So excited to take you through data analytics. You may know, just so you have a bit of context on how I work and who I work with, we generally do have local CEs, so we call them customer engineers in our markets, and then I support them from a technical level, and then I have my own little specialty, which is this data analytics space, which is what I'll be talking to you all about tonight, or today, or this morning for some of you. Our colleague Ollie will be doing an EMEA friendly session later today, so I've got his little slide here, but that's relevant for later. So the first thing I wanted to state, it's not just myself who works on data analytics. We do have a few other counterparts. So we have Dr. Raju. He is basically a consultant in this space. He used to run basically the IT director for a Catholic education network, a specific diocese. The kind of, think of a diocese as a group of schools like a district in Australia. And he built an amazing analytics platform, which I'll talk about a bit later in one of the case studies. We also have Mayu, who's basically been creating a lot of our dashboard samples that we basically provide to you all for free, where you can basically make a copy of and attach to your own data. We then have Victor, who works on the sales perspective, and then we have another custom engineer. Because data analytics spans not just kind of Workspace and Chrome, but also the Google GCP, GCP. We have basically a customer engineer who helps us in that area as well, who has a lot of experience on our team called Jun. So quite a big team who's kind of focused on data analytics, and it is getting kind of more and more popular, which is great. So I did want to just kind of start with an overview, and when I talk about data in general, people get very excited. But I also want to kind of use an analogy here. I recently became a dad for the first time, so I have a 16-month-old. So this analogy, I think, is quite relevant. And when it comes to data, it really much is a journey. And the first part of that journey, as many of you may know, is crawling. So I refer to the crawling phase of the data journey as basically when you're just using first-party data. When I say first-party data, I mean that's data that's already been kind of created by just using Google Workspace and Google Classroom. But once you have that data, we generally see customers move to the walking phase part of the journey, where they start adding other third-party data. So third-party data is basically data which is not part of the Google ecosystem. You can imagine like attendance data, which is quite commonly used in the education space. Maybe you have well-being surveys as an example that you send out to teachers as well as students, and a whole other array of different kind of data sources there. Once you kind of walk, you can then run. Once you have these data and you can combine them, you can do some pretty cool things in relation to insights and make predictions. But the most important thing is turning those predictions kind of into interventions or to action. And then using that information to maybe do prevention or preventative measures. So I call that the fly phase. I'll talk about Dr. Raju's project a bit later, which is kind of in between the run and the fly stage. But the one thing in relation to the crawling phase, which is kind of first-party workspace data, there are different data sources which are available, as I mentioned, automatically kind of created just through your usage of our tools. And the first one is apps and service data. You can imagine, and this is pretty straightforward, right? This is like who's using Gmail, who's using Google Drive, how many users, uploading documents and so forth. That all that kind of information was automatically being generated across your tenant or your domain. The other area is in relation to security and audits. So whenever you take an action or maybe an admin changes a password, all of that information is logged and also available to admins. The other area, which is very common if you do have devices, especially Chromebook devices in your schools or your districts, kind of active usage of those devices is also captured. In addition, we do have some very basic data on like what other types of devices are accessing Workspace, be that maybe a Windows device or an iOS device as well. But we obviously have more detailed information when it comes to Chrome devices. The one thing that teachers are very interested in and kind of the learning side of our customers is classroom usage. So understanding who's using Classroom, are they posting, are there active classes, are students turning in assignments, are they turning assignments late? All that kind of information is also being automatically generated. And actually, we just updated this one to also include some Gemini insights, which is good. And then last but not least is basically we have data related to read along. So read along is such an amazing tool in relation to increasing reading literacy, English reading literacy. And we're basically now able to kind of export that data, and we've provided some templates or some samples, dashboards on what displaying that. And as an example here, we're actually working in Pakistan to increase the reading literacy of English. And that's kind of where this data has been really critical there. So that's actually very new, the read along data. Obviously, teachers in their read along classes have data, but this is basically across all the classes within your tenant or domain. And then, yeah, obviously I mentioned the classroom activity. Whoop, I'm going the wrong way. Better press the other button. Now the different type, I always bring up this slide because when you speak to different people at a customer site, so in your school, different people will be interested in different types of data. So as an admin, they're generally interested in like ROI or like who's using, we've invested in this technology, is it being used? CISOs are generally pretty much interested in like the security and audit slides to understand kind of, as mentioned earlier, like what third-party apps are accessing your data. Teachers are trying to understand maybe how students are engaging in Google Classroom, are they handing in assignments? And then when we look at teacher and learning leaders, they maybe want to understand which classes or which teachers are actually using the tools, because maybe that identifies a professional development need. So depending on who you're speaking to is kind of what data they'll be interested in. Now, how do you access this data? There are kind of three options. One is in the admin console. So many of you are probably very familiar with the admin console. There are pre-existing reports, which are kind of tiny bit customizable. You can add a few fields, but they're kind of out of the box is what you get there. Another way is you could create your own kind of tool to go and query our APIs to gather all this data for you. And then the third kind of easiest option, also allows for customizability, is the BigQuery integration. We call this BigQuery Export, or BQE. I should put that acronym on the, put that on here, BQE. And now that is available for education standard and education customers. And that's what I'll be talking about in this session, just because it is the easiest. Once you do set it up, you set it up one time, and it pushes all the information automatically for you and continually keeps that updated. There isn't any kind of operational overhead when using the BigQuery export tool. So this is the only technical slide. Some people will probably be like, oh, this is a great slide. Other people are like, what are you talking about? I've tried to make it as simplified as possible. I'm a very visual person, so I created this diagram mainly for my own learnings and trying to explain it to folks. So I hope this makes sense to everyone on the call. So first of all, we have the data sources. So in this case, we talked about the crawl phase, which is kind of first party data. So that's Google Workspace and Classroom data. We then need to store that data somewhere. We do that in our platform called on GCP called BigQuery. And in the data world, we talk about data pipelines. In this case, the feature BigQuery export, which I just mentioned earlier, creates that data pipeline for you and manages all of it. So it's really straightforward to kind of set up. But once it's in BigQuery, it's kind of like, that's not so useful. How do we visualize that data? So we have a tool called Looker Studio, which is a data visualization tool, which is free. And this is kind of how it flows in relation to the data. And this is kind of what I would call the crawl phase of my analogy of the data journey. So I kind of focus on this stage because one, it's the first stage and it's kind of an easy way to get started. But we have a lot of customers, as mentioned, who maybe have different visualization platforms that they already use. Maybe you already use some kind of visualization tool. You could always plug that into BigQuery. It's actually very easy to do that. And then it always gets kind of a bit more exciting. And this is where we move to the walk and run phase, is adding other third-party data sources, be that maybe an LMS data, attendance data, and well-being data and stuff, which I mentioned earlier. But I am kind of more focused on the crawl phase, and that's what I'm going to focus on today. Let me kind of jump ahead to examples. So I mentioned Dr. Raju, and we came across him a few years ago, actually, just because their diocese or district were already using. It's about 60 schools they had in their diocese, which were already using Google Workspace. And he had done some amazing work in predictive analysis. So this is their story. It took over like 6 years. The good news here is that from the learnings that he has had, he's actually basically written a guide on how to do this in a lot quicker time frame. But it's also good to understand his journey. So basically they had multiple different silos of data. They put that eventually into one data lake. And then from there, because they had longitudinal data, so this is not workspace data specifically, but longitudinal data on student assessments, when the students were joining years 11 and 12, within the first 2 weeks, they were able to basically predict what their end of year marks were, all based on that longitudinal past data. And that had a 93% accuracy. From that data, as I mentioned, the data in itself is not super valuable. It's like what you do with that data. So they actually hired, and the actual positions at the diocese were called data storytellers. And they're able basically to translate that data, and they spoke to principals and teachers at the schools where they had identified possible maybe at-risk students or areas of improvement. And it's super critical. This stage here, it was actually, they said, the most impactful because they were able to translate that data into insights and into actions. And then from that, they were then able to create an entire school framework. And they actually made some changes to the school rostering system based off attendance data and other areas. So this is actually super small, so maybe you can't read this, but in the data world, in Dr. Raju's example in the diocese, they had over 100 different data points. They basically threw everything into the system, and then the system learned how to did the predictive analysis, and then popped out the score. But what the system also told Dr. Raju was, actually, out of all those inputs, there's really the difference between each input is on the impact it has is it changes. So basically, that's what they're calling features. So you can think of like each data point as like a feature, and this was basically the rank list of what feature, which data point had the most impact. So interestingly enough, and this is something that Dr. Raju learned himself, he was aware of this, but the data actually kind of quantified this, was that the most common data point that people think is most important to predicting marks or end of year marks. I don't know if people want to take a guess on what that would be. One of the most common things is attendance, right? The more you attend, you're most likely to get a higher mark. I don't know if anyone can read this slide because it is so small, which is maybe a benefit on me asking the question, but does anyone else have any ideas maybe on what would be another data point which is super impactful for basically end of year scores? Anyone? Put it into the chat, it's probably the easiest if anyone wants to take a guess. This is kind of super interesting for myself. Well, if you can't read, which I'm hoping you can't, is actually connection school relationship. Yeah, that's a super interesting thing. Well, in his findings, well, basically the two most important or impactful predictors or data points was actually English. So the first two here is English Standard and English Advanced. And the reason this is important, and Dr. Raju mentioned, was that basically, if you can't comprehend what a question is in maths, then you won't be able to understand it well. So basically, improving your English comprehension is critical and basically allows you to build skills in all the other subject areas. So they actually found that English Standard, English Advanced, then reading level. Yeah, sorry, Dan.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, and then so English Standard, English Advanced, reading level, and then attendance rate was actually the fourth when it comes to feature importance. And then interestingly enough, they had suburb amount of days they were in Australia. So a lot of these in the community were in and out of the country, but just a really interesting finding. And Dr. Raju always mentions, if you want to improve scores, improve English as the basis there, or the foundation. The other thing just to note that they did, well, they basically had a single dashboard which had a whole range of different charts and so forth, and they looked at all different areas, be that enrollments, how many students were enrolled, grades, growth. They did teacher surveys. They actually had well-being surveys as well, parent experiences, as well as how many students were leaving the school. And they put that all basically into a single dashboard, which then the data storytellers could talk to the principals and basically show these dashboards to the relevant parties. Another example completely, so that was an Australian example. This one's a completely different example in Malaysia. They have an online learning system which actually uses Google as the ID called Dilema. And one thing, their problem that they were trying to solve is basically they had purchased a huge amount of devices, it's kind of at a central level, and then they had dispersed those devices to schools across the country. And what they wanted to see is, like, are those devices actually being used? And they basically were able to supplement kind of first-party data with a little bit of third-party data, and they created a dashboard basically for the admins to understand where devices were, what type of devices were distributed to what schools, and what schools were using what devices. And then so from this data, depending on what devices were being used, they actually changed their purchasing for the next purchasing of devices. They used this data to understand what devices to purchase, because they wanted to purchase devices which were going to be used. So another kind of example, very different to predictive analysis of end of year scores. This was in relation to kind of ROI on devices, and where we can make sure that we buy devices for the next refresh, which will be used. The other area that we are working with Malaysia is in relation to read along, as well as Pakistan. And we're working with certain schools to basically see what their reading level is in English, and can we basically, does read along have an impact for them? So that's all very fresh. We don't have results of this yet. As I mentioned, that's kind of in pilot phase right now. And this is just an example of kind of some of the dashboards that we have developed to see the progress. So it includes things like book level accuracy of words. I don't know if people are aware of read along, but basically you have text and then you read back. The student basically reads back, and it uses AI and the microphone to understand what words they need to that they maybe need practice on, and then from there you can kind of recommend different texts and so forth.
My name is Bogdan. I am the lead learning designer for AppsEDU. If you're looking for more tips and tricks on how to use Gemini and the Google tools inside and outside the classroom, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss a thing. And if you're ready to unlock a whole new level of productivity in your school, get in touch and we'll be happy to schedule a free demo call and discover how Gemini can transform teaching, learning, and boost productivity for you and your colleagues. And for a limited time, when you partner with us for Gemini licenses, you get exclusive access to our Gemini Insiders community. That means regular free hands-on training, to get your staff and teachers confident with using Gemini and generative AI. As I said, both inside and outside the classroom. Don't miss this unique opportunity. Click the link in the description to schedule your free demo call.